Everyone wants change until it arrives. Then suddenly they resist it, they fight it, they mourn the very thing they said they wanted gone.
Because change is a paradox. People crave it conceptually, but emotionally, they fear it. They fear losing identity, certainty, rhythm.
That's what makes Law 45 so subtle and so strategic. Green says, preach the need for change, but never reform too much at once.
In other words, you can talk transformation, you can sell revolution, but when it comes to implementation, you move like smoke, gradually, intelligently.
Because people don't break from habit, they cling to it, even when it no longer serves them. So if you shatter the system all at once, the system pushes back, hard.
We see this in history. How many revolutions collapsed not from lack of vision, but from speed, from trying to rewrite everything overnight?
The French Revolution, the Arab Spring, massive uprisings, massive hope, followed by chaos because people were asked to adapt faster than they were emotionally ready.
And Green's advice is timeless. Manage change not as a storm, but as a series of signals. You preach big, but you execute small.
That's the art. You keep the people excited with the idea of change while slowly feeding them one new reality at a time.
And you frame every small reform as natural, as necessary, as part of something familiar. You never say, we're destroying the old. You say, we're evolving it.
It's narrative control. You don't let people feel like they're being erased. You let them feel like they're part of something growing, something they helped build.
Because if you trigger fear of loss, they'll sabotage your movement. But if you trigger pride of progress, they'll defend it.
So this law is for the real strategists, the ones who know that power doesn't come from breaking the system, but from bending it gradually until it looks like yours. When we talk about change, we're not really talking about ideas. We're talking about identity, and identity is sacred to people.
Exactly. When someone hears change, what they often feel is, I was wrong, or I'm being left behind. That's not logic, that's survival instinct.
That's why Green warns, if you introduce change too abruptly, people don't just reject the new, they try to destroy it.
And not necessarily because they hate it, but because they weren't given time to prepare themselves emotionally. They weren't given a bridge between the old and the new.
The best leaders know this. They introduce reform not with explosions, but with questions, with small shifts, with consent.
And often they let the people feel like it was their idea. That's a huge part of this law. Make the change feel organic.
We see this in corporate culture all the time. When a CEO comes in and tries to flip the table overnight, employees push back. But when small tweaks are introduced under the radar, suddenly the whole company has changed and no one felt threatened.
Because no identity was attacked, no one had to declare war on their past. They just evolved.
And that's the brilliance of this law. It's not anti-change, it's pro-transition. It respects the psychology of habit, of comfort, of self-image.
So, if you want to lead change, ask yourself, how much can I shift without triggering fear? How can I make the old feel present in the new?
And maybe more importantly, what pace can I sustain without losing the audience?
Because timing is everything. Too slow and people think you're weak. Too fast and they think you're reckless.
There's a zone, that sweet spot, where people feel challenged but not violated, excited but not destabilized. That's where true reform lives.
And to get there, you have to see change not as a product, but as a process, a choreography of trust, familiarity, and carefully timed disruption.
The amateur says, burn it down. The strategist says, let it transform itself with my guidance.
You know where this law really shines? In politics. Because political leaders are constantly walking a line. Promise change, but not too much.
Right. They campaign as revolutionaries, but govern as reformers. They make speeches that shake the system, but policies that massage it.
Because they understand, you don't win by erasing the past, you win by reinterpreting it, by framing your reforms as a continuation of something familiar.
That's the move. You don't say, everything before me was broken. You say, we are returning to our true values, and here's how.
It's the illusion of continuity. Even when you're shifting the core, you dress it in tradition. You wear the clothes of the old order while building the new.
That's how empires survive regime changes. It's not a rupture, it's a rebrand. You don't kill the symbols, you repurpose them.
And this applies outside of politics too. Think about companies that successfully pivot. They don't say, "We've changed everything." They say, "We've grown, evolved, but we're still who you trust."
That language is intentional. It soothes. It gives people a sense of continuity in the midst of innovation.
Because humans don't just fear change, they fear abandonment. They don't want to feel like their past choices were foolish.
So if you frame your reform as a betrayal of the past, you alienate your audience. But if you frame it as the fulfillment of the past, they follow.
That's the brilliance of this law. It doesn't say, "Don't change." It says, "Change with psychological intelligence."
Exactly. Change with empathy, change with strategy, change with context.
And that's what separates a leader from a rebel. A rebel breaks, a leader blends until the new feels inevitable.
And once it feels inevitable, resistance fades. People forget the old version. They think this is how it's always been.
Because the best changes don't feel like revolutions. They feel like home, just slightly different than yesterday.
It's ironic. The more loudly you scream, "Everything must change," the more enemies you create, especially among those who were comfortable with the old system.
And sometimes those enemies aren't obvious. They smile, nod, agree in public, and sabotage you in silence.
Because radical change makes people feel disposable, like everything they contributed before no longer matters. That's a dangerous emotional trigger.
This is where impatience becomes a liability. Reformers get excited. They want transformation now, but they forget humans don't download new identities overnight.
Exactly. Real change is layered. And more than that, it's absorbed socially. People don't just need to hear it, they need to see others accepting it first.
Which means you have to pace it. You have to build momentum gradually, allowing one group to adjust before bringing in the next.
And you have to disguise the reform in familiar terms. This isn't new, you say, it's the natural next step.
That line alone, the natural next step, has so much psychological power. It makes people feel like they're moving forward, not being dragged.
And that's what most failed revolutions miss. They present the future as a rejection, not a progression. And rejection makes people defensive.
So what happens? They resist, not because they love the old, but because they hate being told they're obsolete.
Which is why reformers should never attack the past directly. Even if the system was broken, there were people who survived through it. You don't insult their survival story.
You honor it while evolving it. You say, what got us here was good, but what gets us there needs to be better.
That subtle shift changes everything. It invites people to grow, instead of shaming them into compliance.
And when people feel invited into the future instead of shoved toward it, they step willingly.
That's not manipulation, that's design. It's crafting the emotional path of reform with awareness.
Because change doesn't begin with structures, it begins with stories. And the story you tell about the past, the present, the future decides who follows you and who fights you.
Here's the secret most people miss. The first step of real reform isn't public, it's private. It happens in whispers, in structure, in silence.
Exactly. You don't start by declaring, "We've changed everything." You change things first, quietly, then let people discover the difference.
Because if they discover it themselves, they don't feel manipulated. They feel smart, like they were ahead of the curve.
And that's the emotional pivot. People resist change they're told to accept, but they embrace change they feel like they recognized early.
That's why the best reformers study not just what to change, but how to reveal it and when.
Timing is political, psychological, strategic. You don't announce a new era until the old era is already irrelevant.
And while that sounds manipulative, it's actually protective. It protects the reform itself from being killed too soon.
Because premature exposure creates backlash. If people see the blueprint before they're emotionally ready, they tear it up out of fear.
So the wise reformer builds silently, with subtle signals, safe language, familiar symbols.
And when the new version finally appears, people don't feel shocked. They feel like it's been there all along, just waiting.
This is why language matters. The words you use to frame change are often more powerful than the change itself.
You don't say cutting, you say refining. You don't say breaking tradition, you say honoring tradition through evolution.
Words shape perception, and perception decides whether people fight or follow.
And it goes beyond language. Symbols matter too. People attach meaning to rituals, roles, titles, so even as you reform structure, you preserve symbolic continuity.
Because if the symbols survive, people feel safe. They feel the world is changing, but they still recognize themselves in it.
That's the real artistry of reform, not just transforming systems, but translating them into something emotionally recognizable.
So you're not just a reformer, you're a storyteller, a translator, a guide.
And when you do it right, people look back and say, I don't even remember how it used to be. That's when you know you've succeeded.
So here's the final paradox. The more radical the vision, the more subtle the strategy must be.
Exactly. If your goal is massive change, you have to make it feel small, familiar, inevitable, not threatening.
Because real power doesn't rush. It doesn't scream revolution. It whispers continuity while engineering transformation.
And that's the core of Law 45. You preach change, loudly if necessary, but you deliver it in increments, measured, strategic, adaptable.
It's the opposite of impatience. It's reform as ritual, slow, consistent, symbolic. That's how institutions change without collapsing.
And more than that, it's how you bring people with you, not by dragging them, but by letting them recognize themselves in the new version.
Because people don't fight change when they feel like they're part of it. They fight it when they feel replaced.
So as a strategist, you never trigger that alarm. You don't provoke identity crises. You create identity evolution.
And the truth is, this law is hard to follow when you're passionate. When you see what needs to change, it's tempting to bulldoze everything.
But passion without patience becomes destruction. And history is full of reformers who had the right idea and the wrong strategy.
This law protects you from that. It slows you down, not to weaken your vision, but to ensure it survives.
Because any fool can burn down a system, but it takes real intelligence to reshape one without it realizing it's being reshaped.
And when you do that, when you master the tempo, the symbols, the language, you don't just lead change, you become its architect.
And that's what power looks like at the highest level. Quiet, strategic, long-term.
Next week, we move to Law 46, never appear too perfect. And that one, it cuts deep, because perfection, oddly enough, creates enemies.
But for now, ask yourself, where am I trying to change too much, too fast? And how can I slow it down without losing direction?
Because when you lead people gently into the new, they don't even realize they've left the old behind.